Good morning. Today's lessons will be about one of the causes of the American Revolution, and it's titled A Call to Arms. This lesson can be found in the McGraw-Hill textbook, Chapter 6, Lesson 3. The enduring understanding here. Conflict can lead to change. And this is what we're going to see in the events leading up to the battles of the American Revolution. The essential questions are, why does conflict develop? And then what motivates people to act? The learning targets are extremely important because this tells you what you are expected to know by the end of the lesson. Not just know, but what you will be able to do. First one says, you will be able to identify the founders and recognize their contributions. You will evaluate the battles of Lexington and Concord, and you will also be able to compare points of view held by patriots and loyalists. The important vocabulary words for this lesson are Minutemen. It says here, during the Revolutionary era, it was a civilian sworn to be ready to fight with only 1 minute's notice. It looked a little bit like this. The word approached, it means to draw near something, or basically sneaking up on something. So-called, or better known as, couldn't find a picture for that one. A loyalist. A loyalist was an American colonist who remained loyal to Britain and opposed the war for independence. But a patriot was an American colonist who favored American independence. This is a picture of the First Continental Congress, which started in September 1774. 55 delegates gathered in Philadelphia. They had come to set up this political body that would represent the colonists and challenge British control. The delegates called this body the Continental Congress. Now, leaders from 12 of the 13 colonies attended the meeting. Only Georgia did not send a representative. Massachusetts sent Samuel Adams, who was one of the members of the Sons of Liberty, and they also sent his cousin, John Adams, who was a lawyer in Massachusetts. He's also remembered for being the one who defended the soldiers during the Boston Massacre. New York also sent a lawyer by the name of John Jay. But Virginia decided to send 3 people, George Washington, Richard Henry Lee, and Patrick Henry. Now, these delegates, when they were there, they discussed complaints against the British, and then they voted. In their statement of grievances, delegates called for the repeal of 13 acts of Parliament. They believed that the laws violated the laws of nature and the principles of the English Constitution and several charters of the colonies. The delegates also discussed complaints about British trade. They decided to boycott all British trade. They were not going to import or export anything to Britain. Now, this is a picture of the Minutemen. Minutemen were basically colonists. They were civilian soldiers, basically, who, before they had an army, they decided that they would defend their communities. They practiced using muskets and cannons, but there was one requirement. In order to be a Minuteman, you had to have your own musket and your own ammunition. Now, later on, as things got more and more tense between Britain and the colonies started storing military supplies. Now, the reason they're called Minutemen is because they were always bragging and boasting that they would be ready to fight at a minute's notice. Meanwhile, the British are doing the same exact thing. Pictured here on the left is King George III. He's telling Parliament that the New England colonies are in a state of rebellion. And blows must decide who would control America. By 1775, in April, several thousand British troops were in and around Boston, with more on the way. British General Thomas Gage had orders to seize all the weapons from the Massachusetts militia and arrest their leaders. Gage also learned that the militia was storing arms and ammunition at Concord, a town which was about 20 miles northwest of Boston. He ordered 700 troops under Lieutenant Colonel Francis Smith to Concord. He says, where you will seize and destroy all the artillery and ammunition that you can find. On the night of April the 18th in 1775, colonial protest leader Dr. Joseph Warren walked through Boston, watching for any unusual activity by the British. He saw troops marching out of the city. Warren alerted Paul Revere and William Dawes, who were both members of the Sons of Liberty. Revere and Dawes rode to Lexington, a town east of Concord, to spread the word that the British were coming. Revere galloped across the countryside, shouting his warning of the approaching troops. Hearing the news, Samuel Adams said, "What a glorious morning this is." Samuel Adams was always ready to fight against the British. Unfortunately, a British patrol later captures Dawes and Revere both. So another rider by the name of Samuel Prescott carries the warning on to Concord. Meanwhile, the British continued their march. At dawn, the Redcoats approached Lexington. There they ran into about 70 waiting Minutemen, led by Captain John Parker. The Minutemen stood on the town common with muskets in hand. Badly outnumbered, the Minutemen were about to give way to the Redcoats. Just then, a shot was fired. From where, it's still not clear. Both sides let loose an exchange of bullets. When the shooting ended, 8 Minutemen were dead. The British continued on to Concord. While some troops burned the few weapons they found, the others met a group of Minutemen waiting at the North Bridge. In a short battle, the British took heavy losses. They began to make their way back to Boston. All along the road, colonists hid behind the trees and fired on soldiers. By the time the Redcoats reached Boston, at least 174 were wounded and 73 were dead. About 60 years later, this poet, Ralph Waldo Emerson, writes it in the Concord Hymn that the Americans at Lexington and Concord had fired the shot heard round the world. After the battles of Concord and Lexington, armed conflict with British soldiers quickly spread. Benedict Arnold, a captain in the Connecticut militia, raised a force of 400 men to seize Fort Ticonderoga near Lake Champlain in New York. Ticonderoga occupied a key location. It was also rich in military supplies. Arnold learned that Ethan Allen of nearby Vermont was planning to attack the fort, so he joined forces with Allen's men, the so-called Green Mountain Boys. Together, they took the British by surprise. Fort Ticonderoga surrendered on May 10, 1775. But later, Arnold becomes a traitor to the Patriot cause. He sold military information to the British. When his crime was discovered in September of 1780, he fled to British-controlled New York City. There he commanded British troops and led raids against the Americans in Virginia and Connecticut. Following Lexington and Concord, more volunteers joined the colonial militias. Soon, militias around Boston numbered about 20,000 strong. The British remained in control of the city, with the militia camped nearby. On June 16, 1775, militia, commanded by Colonel William Prescott, set up posts on Bunker Hill and Breed's Hill, across the harbor from Boston. The next day, the Redcoats assembled at Breed's Hill. Bayonets drawn, they charged. Low on ammunition, Prescott reportedly ordered, "Don't fire until you can see the whites of their eyes," which means that these soldiers would have to be very close to them. The Americans opened fire, forcing the British to retreat. Twice more the Redcoats charged, receiving furious fire from above. Finally, the Americans ran out of gunpowder and had to withdraw. The battle on Breed's Hill, which became known as the Battle of Bunker Hill, was a British victory. Yet the British suffered heavy losses, with more than 1,000 dead and wounded. They were learning that defeating the Americans on the battlefield would be neither quick nor easy. As news of these battles spread, each colonist had to make a major decision to either join the rebels or remain loyal to Great Britain. Those who sided with Britain were called the Loyalists. They didn't think that these unfair taxes justified a rebellion. Some of them were even office holders who felt a responsibility to uphold British rule. Others felt that they had not suffered from British policies and saw no reason to break with Britain. Some believed that Britain would win the war, and they didn't want to be on the side of the losing. The Patriots, on the other hand, supported the war. They believed that the colonists should have the right to govern themselves. The Patriots were determined to fight the British until American independence was won. The American Revolution was not just a war between America and Britain. It was also a civil war. Patriots against the Loyalists. Thank you. This concludes the lesson.